April 29th, 1945. A Sunday morning, the sky, gray as ash, the air. Cold enough to freeze your breath? The soldiers of the U.S. 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, were pushing forward, their boots crunched through the snow, their rifles ready. They were heading toward a large complex near Munich. They thought it was just another mission, maybe a supply depot, maybe a factory, just another target to capture before the war ended. But they had no idea, no idea at all, that they were about to walk straight into the nightmare of the century. They reached a railroad track outside the complex, and there, sitting in complete silence, was a train .39 cattle cars, silent, motionless, like a ghost from another world. The soldiers approached. Slowly, something felt wrong. The air itself seemed heavy, sick. Then they smelled it. That smell, they smelled it before they even saw what was inside. A lieutenant moved closer to one of the cars. He grabbed the wooden door, pulled it open just a crack, peeked inside, and then, he screamed. Pause inside that train, bodies, not just a few, thousands of them, men, women, children, starved beyond recognition, beaten, broken, stacked on top of each other like garbage thrown away and forgotten. They had been left there, left to die of thirst, of cold, of exposure. Some of the bodies had bite marks on them, because the living, in their final moments of desperation, had tried to eat the dead just to survive one more day. The American soldiers were veterans, hardened men. They had fought their way through Italy. They had stormed beaches in France. They had seen their friends blown apart by artillery fire. But they had never seen anything like this. One soldier, a tough 19-year-old kid from Oklahoma who had survived every battle without shedding a tear, sat down in the snow and he started crying uncontrollably. Another soldier stumbled away from the train and vomited in the snow. But for most of them, the sadness didn't last long. It transformed into something else, something darker, rage, a cold, shaking, murderous rage. They looked up at the SS watchtowers in the distance. They could see figures moving up there. Guards, the ones who had done this. The soldiers tightened their grip on their rifles. Their knuckles turned white. And in that single moment, everything changed. The rules of war, evaporated. The Geneva Convention didn't matter anymore. Their training, forgotten. The only thing that mattered now was revenge. This is the true story of the Dachau liberation reprisals. The day American soldiers snapped. The day they lined up SS guards against a wall. The day they became executioners. And the day General Patton looked at what they had done and decided that sometimes murder is justice. The men of the 45th Infantry Division were not murderers. They were farm boys, factory workers, students. They were the liberators. Before April 29th, they had a reputation, a good reputation. Professional soldiers who followed the rules. They took prisoners. They treated the wounded. They did things by the book. But Dachau changed them in an instant. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks was the commander on the ground, a Bithel book officer. He tried to keep control of his men. He shouted orders through the chaos. Keep moving. Don't look at the train, eyes forward. But you see Ulil Densingle, tied ... not look. How could you not look? There were 2,300 bodies on that train. The soldiers walked past them, one by one, and they saw the eyes of the dead, staring at them, hollow, empty, accusing. They saw the skeletons. What was left of human beings? Private John Lee would later say, "We were mad. We were so mad we wanted to kill every German in the world." They reached the main gate of the camp. The SS guards were still there. The commandant, ... Martin Weiss. He had fled like a coward, but he left behind a young lieutenant named Heinrich Wicker, and about 500 SS men. Wicker knew the war was over. Everyone knew it. He wanted to surrender. He thought if he played it right ... if he acted like a gentleman, everything would be fine. So he put on his best uniform, polished his boots until they shined, straightened his cap. He walked out of the gate, holding a white flag. He expected to be treated like an officer. He expected a salute. He expected respect. He was a fool. He walked up to the Americans with confidence and said, "I surrender this camp to the United States Army." An American officer looked at him. "That's clean ... well-fed ... healthy Nazi standing there like he was at a parade." Then the officer looked past him, at the pile of starving corpses behind the gate. He looked back at Wicker, and he spit in his face. The surrender did not go as planned. The Americans entered the camp and chaos ... broke loose. The prisoners saw the Americans. 30,000 living skeletons rushed to the fences. They were screaming with joy, crying, reaching through the wire. Americans, Americans. But while the prisoners cheered, the soldiers were hunting. A group of SS guards tried to surrender near a coal yard. They raised their hands high, shouted desperately, ... Hitler kaputt. Hitler is finished. They thought this magic phrase would save them. It didn't. An American lieutenant was watching them. We believe it was Lieutenant Jack Bushyhead, a Native American officer. He was shaking, not from fear, from rage. He had just walked through the crematorium. He had seen the ovens, still full of human ash, still warm. He looked at these SS guards standing there, healthy, arrogant, acting like victims. He looked at his men. He didn't say a word. He didn't give a verbal order. He just ... gestured with his Thompson submachine gun. Line them up. The Germans were confused at first. Then they understood. They lined up against a brick wall. About 50 of them. They started to panic. Started shouting, 9-9. Geneva Convention. One of them was screaming about international law. An American machine gunner, nicknamed Bird Eye, set up his .30 caliber machine gun on a tripod. The sound of heavy metal clicking echoed in the yard. He looked at the lieutenant. The lieutenant nodded. One single nod, and then ... massive sustained machine gun fire. Screaming had lasted about 10 seconds. When the smoke cleared, the SS guards were on the ground. Most were dead. Some were still twitching. The snow was black with coal dust and red with blood. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks heard the shooting from across the camp. He came running, and when he arrived at the coal yard, he saw his men still firing into the pile of bodies. He pulled out his pistol and fired into the air. Bang. "Stop it," he screamed. "Stop it. What the hell are you doing?" The machine gunner turned to look at him. His eyes were blank. Empty. He wasn't sorry. He was crying. "Colonel," he said through tears. "They deserved it." Sparks wanted to say something. Wanted to restore order. Wanted to be the officer he was trained to be. But he looked at the pile of bodies behind them. The victims, the children, and he said nothing. That wasn't the only incident. It was happening everywhere. At Tower B, more SS guards tried to surrender. They climbed down the ladder from the watchtower. "Hands up," shouting in broken English. "No, shoot. No, shoot." The American soldiers didn't wait. They shot him off the ladder. Fire, fire, fire. The bodies fell, tumbling into the moat below. And then the Americans walked up to the edge of the moat and emptied their entire magazines into the water. Just to be sure. 1G later wrote home to his family. He said, ... It wasn't war. It was an execution. And I didn't feel a thing. After what I saw in those boxcars ... They weren't human to me anymore. But the Americans weren't the only ones killing. The victims wanted their turn. Somehow ... The prisoners got out of the barracks. They were weak. They could barely walk. Skeletons held together by will alone. But they had adrenaline. They had rage. They had waited years for this moment. They found an SS guard hiding in a watchtower. He was young, probably 20 years old, crying, begging the prisoners, dragged him down. They didn't have guns. They had shovels, sticks, their bare hands, and that was enough. The American soldiers stood nearby, ... watching, smoking cigarettes. One officer asked his sergeant, "Should we stop them?" The sergeant took a long drag from his cigarette, exhaled slowly. "No," he said, "let them finish." The prisoners beat the guard to death. They tore him apart. It was primal, savage, brutal. It was justice in another part of the camp. ... The prisoners found a German capo, a traitor, a prisoner who had worked for the Nazis, who had beaten other prisoners to earn extra bread. They drowned him in a latrine for 1 hour. Dachau was a lawless zone. The victims became the judges, the juries, the executioners, and the U.S. Army simply looked the other way. Eventually, ... Order was restored. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks stopped the killing. He gathered his men. He locked up the surviving Germans in a secure building. Not to punish them, to save them from his own soldiers, but the secret couldn't be kept forever. Photos had been taken. Photos of American soldiers standing over piles of executed Germans. Photos of the coal yard, massacre, bodies lined up against the wall. A few days later, an investigative team arrived, led by Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Whitaker. They interviewed the soldiers one by one. They collected the photos, every single one. They wrote a report. Investigation of alleged mistreatment of German guards at Dachau. The report was damning. It concluded that American troops had violated a dead international law. It recommended court-martials. It recommended that the heroes of Dachau be treated as war criminals. The report was sent up the chain of command, higher and higher, until it landed on the desk of General George S. Patton. Patton was a legend, a warrior, a strict disciplinarian who punished soldiers for having unpolished boots. He read the report carefully. He looked at the photos of the dead SS guards. Then he looked at the photos of the death train, the bodies, the children. The horror. Patton was quiet for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would change everything. Patton summoned the investigating officer to his headquarters. The officer walked in, nervous, holding the report. Patton held up the document. "What is this garbage?" he said. The officer swallowed hard. "Sir, it is evidence of war crimes committed by Patton," slammed the report down on his desk. "War crimes?" His voice was ice cold. "You walk into a place like that, you see 2,000 dead bodies on a train, children starved to death, and you expect my boys to follow the rule book?" He leaned forward. "Hell no." Patton said something that would become legendary. These men were overwrought. They had nervous trigger fingers. It happens in war. Then he did something that shocked everyone in that room. He didn't sign the court-martial papers. He took the report. And according to some witnesses, he burned it. Other sources say he ordered it buried in the deepest, most classified file in the archive, never to be opened. He looked at his staff and said, "There will be no trial. The SS got what they deserved." Dismissed. General Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, saw the photos of the death train. He understood immediately. Putting American heroes on trial for killing Nazi monsters would destroy morale. It would tear the army apart. So the order came down from the top: quash the investigation. The charges were dropped. Lieutenant Jack Bushyhead, the man who ordered the coal yard execution, went home to Oklahoma. He never spoke about what happened that day. Not to his family. Not to reporters. Not to anyone. He died in 1977. A silent hero with a dark secret. The Dachau reprisals remain controversial today. Neo-Nazis use it as propaganda. They say, "Look, the Americans were bad too." But historians see it differently. It wasn't a planned genocide. It wasn't a systematic campaign of terror. It was a human reaction, the snap of the human mind when confronted with pure evil. When you see a child starved to death, when you see a room full of bodies, when you see the ovens still warm with human ash, can you remain a professional soldier? Or do you become an avenger? The soldiers of the 45th Division made their choice. They chose vengeance. And General Patton chose to protect them today at Dachau. There is a memorial. It honors the 30,000 victims of the camp. The innocent, the murdered, the forgotten, but there is no memorial for the 50 SS guards who died against that coal yard wall. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves, forgotten by history. History has judged them. They were the architects of hell. And on April 29, 1945, they met the devil. As for the American soldiers, they carried the memory of the death train for the rest of their lives. Some tried to forget. Some had nightmares for decades, but none of them regretted it. One veteran said years later, "I know killing prisoners is wrong. I know that. But that day, at that place, it felt like the only right thing to do." This is the hardest question in war. The question that has no easy answer. If you had been there, if you had seen the death train with your own eyes, if you had walked through those Perix, if you had smelled the crematorium, would you have pulled the trigger? Be honest with yourself, because in that moment, in that place, there was no right answer. Only the choice each man made. And the weight of that choice, they carried forever. This was the Dachau liberation reprisals, the day the liberators became executioners, the day justice and murder became the same thing, the day thou proved even heroes have their breaking point.